This time I have a Sony SLHF300 Beta Hi-Fi. Not a Super Beta, just a Beta Hi-Fi. First of these slimline. This one has a loading problem. And no, it's not what you're thinking. It's not the common problem that most of these machines have. So it's a little different. So you're going to learn something on this one, because this is not the most common of problems, but I have seen it before. Let's check it out. I got another Sony Beta in for service, and I hate it when this happens. Don't use this shit. Bubble wrap. Don't use packing peanuts. They get all over the place. I'll end up tracking this in the house. I'll have these goddamn peanuts, these styrofoam peanuts all over the place for months. I hate this crap. Plus the fact that they get inside machines if they're not wrapped up and can cause more damage. At least this one's wrapped up, but still. I hate packing peanuts because they'll end up everywhere. This is another one that was shipped across the country. I got like 4 units from the same guy. So this is the second one. The 750 was the other one. This is looks to be an SLHF300. It's all wrapped up as well. It says, was working in August 2018. Problem with loading. Head seemed good. SLHF300. Well, let's open this one up and see what it's doing. That's shipping damage or what. The cover looks to be a bit warped there. But that should be expected with anything this old. These were good machines. The 400 is the machine to have because it's super beta. But other than that, these were good machines. We can trigger the front loading mechanism by just pushing this little button down here on the back of here, so I can load it without a tape. Just push that in and then hit that switch. Okay. It's not completing the loading cycle. You saw that, right? So the even though it's spinning, it's not pulling the tape in. We'll try that again. It may be a gear stripped and the shaft is spinning. That was what it might be. Because it's not completing the loading cycle. It's jamming somehow. See if we can see why. It might be the bottom side of this. There's a gear on the bottom of this that turns the other loading gears down below. I can run this by hand. So we'll just turn the mechanism by hand and see where it stops. And why it stops. Take a look at that mechanism while I'm doing this. That's really clean. Like, I don't see any dirt in there. It's like this machine's hardly been used. Yeah, right there's where. Nope, it's still going. Why didn't it do it when it was turning by the motor? Okay, so that should stop turning, and it's turning freely. I have a sneaking suspicion it's probably the gear on the bottom of this is broken. It's split, and now it's not unloading. You see, that should unload when I hit that, when I turn that by hand. Let's just take this piece apart and take a look at it. Just making some lifts out. Usually it's this gear here that breaks. Yeah, there's where it's broken right there. We might be able to fix this. It's the black gear. So this is the gear that's broken right here. This black gear is split. And there's a crack in it. You'll see it right here. Get a close-up of it. There's a split in this gear, and what's happening? Well, you'll see. I can turn this. See that? I can turn that without the other one turning. See that? You'll see the crack. It's right there. So what I need to do is I need to glue this onto the shaft. I can do that by just taking off the top of this gear here. There's the piece that's broken off right there, or come off of it. I got to remove the shaft here. If I just pop out these clips with a screwdriver. So I can pop this apart, and then I can pull this through. Take that pin out like that. I got to glue that other piece back on. So this is the gear that cracks. At least it hasn't broken in two, it's just cracked. So what I can do is I can throw some epoxy on here and glue the base back on like that. And once the epoxy dries, this will then allow this to load the mechanism. So let me grab some epoxy, we'll mix it up, and we'll get this piece glued back together, and that should get this beta machine fully functional again. So we're going to use cold weld, which is similar to JB Weld without the JB Weld price. Same stuff. It's a two-part epoxy, steel reinforced. So we'll just mix up a little bit. I don't need a lot. We're going to make sure that we don't have incidental contact between the two tubes. Otherwise, if we contaminate them and put the cap on it, it will weld the cap permanently and it will never be removable. Now we're just going to mix the two parts together. Should turn to a uniform gray once it's been mixed. I believe this is 5-minute epoxy, 5 to 8 minutes anyway. Then we let it set up for a little while beyond that, just to make sure that it's fully cured. So I'll put some in the end here. And of course, put some onto the end of the shaft. And then push the shaft all the way in. Now I don't want any excess left over here because that could affect the reassembly, so before it dries I'm going to clean it off. I'll just clear off my screwdriver here. We'll use the screwdriver to remove any excess before it dries. I can put some more on the bottom of it here just to make sure that we've got a good seal. Use the paper to wipe off some excess, and then we're going to let this set for a while. Oh no, the robot's coming in. The robot is cleaning the floor. Alright, the glue will have dried by now, which it has. There we go. As good as new. Time to reassemble. There we go. Now, assemble the planetary gear set, which is what this is. For those of you not familiar with how this works, it's a planetary gear set. It's got a power split device here, which has got the planet carrier and the planet gears. If I shine some light on it, you might be able to see into it. The motor shaft, you can see if I spin this gear, you can see the motor shaft, you can see the planet gears, see the two planet gears in there on the planet carrier. What happens when the motor spins is the planet carrier spins around, and this would be the equivalent of the ring gear. It's held in place by this clutch right here, which is driven by the solenoid over here. When the solenoid plunger pulls in or releases, that changes the position of this cog, this stopper. So when it's in this position, when the motor spins, it spins the ring gear, which operates the tooth belt to lower and raise the cassette. And then when the solenoid releases, when the motor spins, it now spins this gear to thread the tape. So we'll drop the mechanism, or drop this planetary gear set back into place. Just have to make sure that the control arm is on the correct side, so that when the plunger pulls in, it will shift this. So we have to make sure it's like that. Throw the screws back in. Okay, that should fix this one. Okay, let's try and see if it's going to work. Oh, flip the lever. There we go. Eject. Okay, let's try a tape. Should play, sort of. I mean, sorry, this tape's in super beta. This is a hi-fi machine, but not a super beta machine. And of course, I got to play it on the analog monitor because the plasma is going to throw interference just from the plasma screen itself. So let me hook it up to the CRT, and there it is playing. I got to kill the sound before I get nailed for copyright. Anyway, there it is playing. It's playing perfect. I can play my aquarium video. Again, this is a super beta tape, so the quality might have a bit of overmodulation, but as you can see, it's playing that tape absolutely perfectly. You can see a little bit of, where am I here? If I point to the screen here, where are we? Right up there. You can see a little bit of overmodulation. That's because it's a super beta tape playing. Looks like bad heads. It's not. It's a super beta tape being played back on a standard beta machine. And that was one of the things that would happen, is you get a bit of overmodulation. When they brought out the super beta format, the version of super beta that ended up on the consumer machines was a compromise. The version of super beta that could have happened is, well, quite frankly, this tape. So this is a beta 1 tape. And when they released super beta for beta 1, they had 2 flavors for super beta. They had the toned down consumer version, and they had the pull out all the stops, let's show what beta can do. And of course, well, this tape's not going to play. Or not going to play very well. Severe overmodulation, because this is in SHB. But as you can see, that tape is trucking along at a pretty good rate. So that's an L750, and that tape will play in 90 minutes in beta 1. But again, super high band, so it's not playing properly. It doesn't look right. The picture doesn't look right. It's playing, but I can't show you the image because it's something I recorded off of YouTube, and even though it's some public videos put out by Lounge V Studios, they released it on YouTube, and they've given everybody a license to use it. You can play this in your store. You can play this video in your doctor's office. You can play it wherever you want. You can use their videos to sell televisions. They don't care. But if you cross-post their videos on a YouTube channel, they will hit you for copyright. So that's happened. They changed the rules. They didn't used to care, and then all of a sudden, 2-3 years later, all of a sudden they decide that, yeah, you can use our content. We're giving you a license to use our content commercially if you want. Just don't put it on social media. If you put it on social media, we'll monetize it. So I have to be careful. But looking at the picture, I can tell that it is overmodulated. The whites are blown out and the blacks are kind of crushed. But the difference between SHB, super high band, and regular beta hi-fi or beta, super beta was quite dramatic. On conventional beta, there was a 1.2 megahertz deviation between the low end and the high end of the luminance carrier. When beta hi-fi came out for NTSC, they shifted the carrier up in frequency a little bit to free up some space between the luminance and the chroma to put the beta hi-fi carriers for the sound. And in doing so, they lost a little bit of high frequency response. So then they shifted the bandwidth up a bit to regain what they lost. They shifted the bandwidth up, I think it was 400 kilohertz. I think it was 400 kilohertz. They went up 200 when they added beta hi-fi, and then they went up another 200, so it's 400 kilohertz higher. They added an extra 200 kilohertz of bandwidth. The reason that they only went 200 kilohertz instead of more was because they wanted to maintain compatibility, for the most part, with the regular beta machines. You notice that Super VHS, when Super VHS was launched, a Super VHS tape will not play on a regular VHS machine at all. Very distorted if you try to play it. They didn't want that to happen with Super Beta on regular beta machines. So they bumped up the carrier frequency a little bit, but tried to maintain compatibility. And then they went back to the drawing boards and thought, well, wait a minute. We haven't had Beta 1 for years. The Beta 1 speed had been completely phased out and it wasn't being used. The machines that were on the market all had the ability to play Beta 1 for tapes that were recorded on the first generation of machines so that they could play them, but they did not have recording capabilities for Beta 1. This machine does not have recording capabilities for Beta 1, just playback. So when they reintroduced Beta 1, they did it with the SLHF300, I believe was the first machine that had it. That's the one that we just saw with the drawer that slides out. It reintroduced Beta 1S. So it could record in regular Beta 1 and Beta 1S. Then when they brought out the SLHF300, they pulled out all the stops. They gave the carrier a much bigger deviation, 6 megahertz. On the conventional beta machine, the original Betamax was 5.4 megahertz was the high end of the carrier. When Super Beta came out, they increased it to 5.6, so they added 200 kilohertz of bandwidth to the carrier, so it went to 5.6. On the original beta, and I might be wrong on the numbers here because I haven't reviewed this in like 40 years, I believe it was 4 to 5.2 megahertz. It was 1.2 megahertz bandwidth. VHS had 1 megahertz. It was 4 megahertz to 5.2. When they shifted up for beta hi-fi, they shifted it up and they went 4.2 to 5.4 because they needed some bandwidth below the lower sideband for the carrier. So it became, instead of 4 to 5.2, it went 4.2 to 5.4. Then they increased it to 5.6, so the low end was 4.2 to 5.6 was Super Beta, and then 6 megahertz SHB 4.2 to 6 megahertz. That's the bandwidth. Anyway, it's getting technical. I might be a little off on my numbers because, again, it's been so bloody long since I studied this. If you go back and look at the Super Beta training tape, which I posted a link to in the last video, Omar Morier, the instructor, he talks about the frequency response for Super Beta versus regular beta. The super high band, which followed that, extended the high end to 6 megahertz, but it also removed any backwards compatibility with non-Super Beta machines. Anyway, this machine is fixed. Let's check all the modes. Skip forward, beta scan as they call it, forward. Beta scan reverse. Fast forward. Rewind. And, of course, play. Alright, this one's done. So, if you got one of these machines and your loading mechanism is doing some weird things, check that gear out. I'm just going to check some of the other things on this, like take a look at the drum and see how shiny this one is. This one doesn't look to be too bad, actually. We'll take a closer look at this, but this one does not look to be nice and shiny like the last one. So I don't think we need to do it on this one. You look down at the drum here, you can see it's slightly, but it's not polished to a high luster like the last one, so we're not going to touch this one because, again, when you do the Comet Cleanser cleaning or de-shining of it, you're actually removing a little bit of the surface, so We don't want to do that unless we have to, because even though it is microscopic, the amount that gets removed, it is gritty, and it does remove a very small layer of aluminum, and of course that changes the dimensions. That's why I say you can only do it a few times, so you don't want to do it unless you absolutely have to. And in this case, this machine's playing perfect, so I don't need to touch that. So I'm going to leave it at that. This one's fixed. Everything's working on this. The VU meter is not working properly on the front. If we notice, yeah, the left meter's not working properly, but I'm not going to touch that. That part is irrelevant. This is that's just kind of as a reference. It's playing hi-fi, no problem. It's playing the tape, no problem. And this one is done. For all intensive purposes, this one's done. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye. There it goes. So just for fun, here's a SHB tape playing back with Super Beta SHB turned on, and this is what happens when you try to play it on a regular machine. You notice how, well, even my display doesn't show there, but you see how bad it looks, right? Turn it on, that's how it's supposed to look. Turn it off, that's what happens when you try to play it on a regular machine. And of course the sync is so bad that the on-screen graphics won't even show. So that's the difference. That's why it was completely not compatible.